Hello, my friends, and welcome to this another Johnny Vedmore Read Through. Yes, we're going to do a read through today of an article, possibly my favorite article that I've ever researched and written. I've done loads now. It's really insane, like how many like comprehensive, rereadable, articles that are based upon real history that will be important going forward. I've done a fair few of them now, but this was one of my favorite by far, and this is really delving deep into the history of organized Satanism, gangsters, the links with gangsters, and the links with intelligence agents, and how these people used the elite nightclubs of the 50s and 60s as a base to network and to dead letter drop and to do their intelligence messing. I want to say the F word, but I'll avoid it. But they mess about with their intelligence business, and eventually this sort of thing led to the downfall of the British government. It started off, of course, for those who know, with a song for Esme. It fills my heart up, like I want to cry when I think of that article, because that was where I was asked for One Nation Under Blackmail if I could look into the nightclubs and whether the craze brought into Esmeralda's barn, why they did. And I discovered that basically the person who used to own Esmeralda's barn died of gas inhalation in a really suspicious way, and there's inaccuracies to the story. And as soon as I found out, I couldn't sleep that night. I went and looked and found that there was a load of nightclub girls in the West End of London. These were in places like Kensington, Mayfair, etc. And these were the posh end nightclubs. And they were nearly all run and owned by women at that point, and a load of them died either in suspicious circumstances or like connected to some sort of like major event. Ruth Ellis was one of them, who owned a little club. The next person to run that also ended up dying in a mysterious way. There was Barbara Knox Marsh, Esmeralda Gulan. There were plenty more who were all these nightclub hostesses and owners who were dying one by one over a year and a half period. And then all those nightclubs were taken over by intelligence linked mobsters, gangsters galore, really quickly. You could see, you see the pattern. And eventually those gangsters would see those nightclubs taken over by the intelligence agents. And they were a place where they could do dead letter drops and all of these sort of stuff, like I say. And so it's a really interesting story. This leads to the downfall of the British government eventually, but it also is the birth of the Stanley Kubrick style Man in a Mask satanic sex parties, sex blackmail operations. And there was one man in particular who really pioneered that, and that's who this article is about. So when looking for information about that sort of era, there is no better place to look than Horace Dibben. And when you go to my site, newspaste.com, you will find the Black Hand series on Newspaste. If you scroll down, you'll see this, which is the title for the Black Hand series, which of course, as you see here, discover how a spate of suspicious deaths throughout London's nightclub scene led to the downfall of the British government, and meet the bizarre selection of characters who made it happen. And there's Esmeralda Noel Smith, Esmeralda Gulan, Esme, and that is Barbara Knox Marsh, and that over there is Horace Dibben, who will look at himself today. Mariella Novotny, who was smuggled out of JFK's bedchamber over here. This is one of Horace Dibben's wives. Would you believe? Smuggled out of JFK's bed chamber and involved in a Profumo affair that led to the downfall of the British government. And this here is the original Jeffrey Epstein, George Huntington Hartford. Similarities are immense. And over here is the Stanley Setti murderers. These is Brian Donald Hume. And I've gone through some of these things with Eric Hunley and other people as well. I've talked about these cases. I love talking about a bit of history. So on Newspaste, you can find this section down in the middle of the page with a Black Hand series. And today's article that we're going to read, again at the top of Newspaste on all of the pages, you can read all the series. Just hover over these buttons, and for instance, with a Black Hand, you can see all of the different articles, and we will be reading the devil himself. Here we go. Horace Dibben. Should put on my glasses for this so I can get it right. The Black Hand, the devil himself, Black Hand 3. How an elite London nightclub fell under the control of intelligence-linked sex blackmail agent, self-described Satanist, and antique dealer named Horace Dibben. Honestly, an credible man to research, a character. I will be doing my Horace Dibben voice, and there will be much more Horace Dibben to come, I tell you. He's very, very peculiar. The peculiar and fascinating Horace Hod Dibben took over Esmeralda's barn within a year of Esmeralda Gouland's tragic death. Hod's supposed ward, Patsy Morgan Dibben, was then put in charge of the club, and the barn then became the center of intelligence-led spy games, gangland infiltration, and an elite sex blackmail operation. Soon, Patsy Morgan Dibben would go missing, reportedly taken by the devil himself. Take a look at the mad world of satanic super spy Hod Dibben. Mad world it is. Patsy Morgan was a simple grocer's daughter from Southampton, England. However, sometime between the age of 12 and 16 years old, she became the legal ward of a very strange and perverted individual. The evidence reveals that Patsy was groomed by a former RAF squadron leader who later claimed to have also been a high-level Satanist within a black magic circle based in the UK. She soon after changed her name to Patsy Morgan Dibben once she had become his legal guardian, or once he had become her legal guardian. This official guardian was a strange antique dealer named Horace Hod Dibben, who eventually created the Black Sheep nightclub in London. The Black Sheep would subsequently become a notorious haunt for some of the most famous people to inhabit British capital's nightclub scene. There you go, this Horace. Hod Dibben took control of Esmeralda's barn less than a year after Esmeralda Gouland's untimely death by gassing. He then ensured that his ward, Patsy Morgan Dibben, became the barn's next hostess with the mostess. Yet, like Esmeralda, Patsy would soon be out of the picture, and her fate is still unclear to this very day. A brief introduction to Horace Hod Dibben. Horace Ronald Dibben was born on the 15th of May 1905 and was the eldest son of Mr. and Mrs. Harry Dibben of Heatherhill in Chilworth. Horace married his first wife, Phyllis D. Stent, at the age of 23 years old in a church ceremony in Havant. The Dibben family were part of the Plymouth Brethren and were affluent enough for the marriage to be reported in the 30th of June 1928 edition of the Hampshire Advertiser, with a newspaper featuring a grainy picture of the happily married couple. The Hampshire Telegraph also reported on the wedding of Horace and Phyllis, stating that there were over 250 guests assembled for the wedding breakfast, and the publication also noted a list of gifts given to the bride and groom. Harry Dibben gave his son and daughter-in-law a house and a cheque, while the other members of the family gave such gifts as a Singer sewing machine and candle stands. Horace himself eventually became known as an antiques dealer, among other things, and in 1928 he and his blushing bride were seemingly set up for life. But a simple life was not something Hod Dibben ever wanted. Instead, he aimed for a much more exciting existence. Exciting. The next mention of Horace Dibben, or Hod Dibben, in the UK press came several years later, in July 1934, when his house in Wentworth, Southampton, was broken into and items valued around £200 was stolen. Now, throughout this article on Newspaste, you'll see these. This is me reading through articles written by Hod Dibben, a selection of articles about his time as a Satanist that were published in the People newspaper or the Mirror newspaper. They changed hands. It was a Sunday edition of it's either the Sunday Mirror or the People newspaper. But they're extremely interesting read throughs. There's four of them, but there's lots of things to get involved with within the articles. The articles are very interactive, have lots of clips within them too. It was after the war when Horace Dibben's profile began to rise significantly. In fact, Hod Dibben stated in an article in 1961 that during the war he served as an RAF officer in the Orkneys. There he claims to have joined a black magic circle and become a practicing Satanist. This weird tale gets stranger still, but we'll return to Hod's alleged satanic bent soon enough. First, we must investigate the circumstances surrounding the mysterious disappearance of his young female ward. Dibben claimed to have decided to leave the Black Magic Circle only a few years after he joined, a decision he says he made due to his participation in a satanic ritual called the Girl and the Goat. It is during this ceremony in which Hod told newspapers that his black magic circle, in which he claimed to have once been an elder, offered a human sacrifice. Yet he also careful to state that the girl who was sacrificed was not murdered, but instead wounded and forever psychologically scarred. Dibben wrote a selection of articles for the People newspaper in the early 1960s entitled Slave of Satan, My Death Warrant, I Flee from the Vengeance of Satan's Brotherhood, and I Cursed This Man and He Fell Dead, respectively, which described the aftermath of his supposed foray into the dark arts. In an article entitled I Cursed This Man and He Fell Dead, Dibben bombastically states, as a fully fledged member of that circle, I had surrendered my body and soul to the worship of evil. I revelled in the wildest orgies and rituals attended by men and women equally as depraved as I. Willingly I rejected goodness, honesty, and purity. In their place I embraced lust and obscenity. Only after 2 years of this depravity, when I attended a particularly loathsome and horrible ceremony, was I jerked back to my senses and convinced that I must quit this evil cult. Even though this could be seen as just the ramblings of an eccentric old coot with a wild imagination, Horace Dibben played a very important part in multiple extremely high-level sexual compromise operations in the near future that involved intelligence circles and powerful elements of British organised crime. One of these operations would ultimately bring down the government in the UK and would nearly do the same in the USA. At the start of the 1950s, Hod and his first wife got divorced. Soon after, he lost most of his inheritance and he was expecting from his late father's estate. However, he still had Patsy. Hod Dibben claimed that Patsy became his ward when she was 12 years old, which suggests this would have happened sometime between the start of World War II and 1940. However, other reports state that Patsy was 16 years old when she came under the guardianship of Dibben, which suggests it happened after the war. This is probably much more likely. Why she agreed to this arrangement is unknown, but Horace Dibben himself described his decision to become her guardian as part of an attempt to mold her into the perfect woman. Throughout the 1950s, it appeared that everything was going wrong for Hod Dibben. The Shepton Mallet Journal reported on the 4th of March 1955 that Horace Dibben, former owner of Lights Carey Manor, Kingston, Somerset, and now 24 Eaton Place, London SW1, was given a suspended sentence of 1 month's imprisonment at Langport. Dibben had been summoned to court for non-payment of a fine, costs, and national health contribution arrears. He could avoid serving prison time by paying a fine of over £70. Over 2 months later, Horace Dibben's bankruptcy was announced in the Westminster and Pimlico News, with another bankruptcy notice reported by the same outfit the following year. However bad life seemed to be getting for Hod Dibben, by 1956 he was still wealthy enough to buy a sizable stake in Esmeralda's barn. Hod Dibben had lost his wife, his fortune, his inheritance, and with the reported disappearance of Patsy Morgan Dibben, he had lost his beloved ward. It is during this period that the wild and unruly world of Hod Dibben begins its spiral towards infamy. The devil himself took Patsy Morgan Dibben. As previously mentioned, Hod Dibben had claimed that he became Patsy's ward when she was only 12 years old, which was the reason she had taken on his surname. In a 1961 article, Dibben stated that Patsy had been the grocer's daughter, whom I had taken into my home and brought up with the extravagant idea of turning her into the perfect woman. Dibben had lost his guardianship of Patsy once she had turned 21, and their relationship had been very strange from the off, made stranger by Horace himself. An article in the Sunday Mirror, published 28th of July 1957, began rewriting Horace's supposed history with Patsy, with the writer Peter Hawkins claiming that Patsy was a 16-year-old typist when she met Dibben. She answered his advertisement, intelligent young girl wanted for antiques business. The latter article also mentioned that Hod Dibben had sent her to an exclusive finishing school. And that's Patsy Morgan Dibben with Kai Grant. He's a famous musician at the time at Esmeralda's barn. From the sketch, Wednesday, 19th of October edition, 1955. By the mid-50s, Patsy Morgan Dibben was having a very interesting career. She was just about to be installed by Hod Dibben as the hostess of Esmeralda's barn, and she had been running a publicity agency in London's West End. In this latter role, she represented some of the stars of the silver screen and acted as the agent for Hollywood actresses such as Zena Marshall and Jean Carson. In fact, Patsy herself was beginning to become an icon, appearing in the Sketch magazine on the 19th of October 1955 as it celebrated the reopening of Esmeralda's barn with a picture of Patsy being serenaded by Kai Grant, the Guyanese actor and musician who sang Caribbean and folk songs in revues and cabaret venues during this period. As mentioned in the first article of this series, Patsy Morgan Dibben was eventually erroneously described by many as the woman who had originally created Esmeralda's barn, with books such as Douglas Thompson's Stephen Ward Scapegoat referring to Esmeralda's barn as a club established by Patsy Morgan Dibben. Under the stewardess of Patsy Morgan Dibben and the enigmatic Hod Dibben, Esmeralda's barn started to become the center for illicit activities. It was also noted in Thompson's book that Esmeralda's barn during this period had regular guests such as Bill Astor and Stephen Ward. Thompson described the nightclub as being 5 minutes from the American Embassy in Grosvenor Square, not much more from the Russian Embassy in Kensington Park Gardens, and a brief drive along the embankment and a couple of lefts from Whitehall. It was convenient. Esmeralda's barn, close location to the dead letter drop boxes which were being used by the Soviets in Britain to pass information they had collected to their KGB hands-on controllers, as Thompson termed it, made the Knightsbridge night spot a hub of Cold War activity. Thompson also wrote that Alexander Nekrasov's father was a KGB colonel, as was his stepfather, and he spent his early life in the London Embassy. In 2013, the former Kremlin advisor and Soviet specialist told me, in the late 1950s, there were many Russian diplomats or researchers or whatever attached to the embassy. They all worked for the KGB. Why else were they there? It was the Cold War. It was frenetic. The world wasn't going to end tomorrow. It might end today. That was the environment they were working in. Every person who came to London from Moscow had a specific mission. It wasn't to learn to make tea, which wasn't on offer at Esmeralda's. A good time and information were. On the 19th of August 1956, the Sunday Pictorial reported on the strange disappearance of Patsy Morgan Dibben. In an article entitled Nightclub Girl Riddle, Earl of Warwick Answers a Pit Call, the Sunday Pictorial reporters informed their readership about the curious tale of a missing nightclub hostess in a very familiar London night spot. The piece explains. The girl is Patsy Morgan Dibben, 28. 6 weeks ago, she left Esmeralda's Barn, the Knightsbridge club she had been running for the past year. During this period, Patsy Morgan Dibben had been living in a luxury flat in Eaton Place, Belgravia, along with her legal guardian, the aforementioned Horace Dibben. Dibben would later become the organizer of black magic-themed sex parties catering for a certain group of London's elites. Many people would consider Dibben's relationship with very young girls to be suspicious at best and paedophilic at worst, as Horace Dibben appears to repeatedly target girls between the ages of 12 and 17 years old, including well after the disappearance of Patsy Morgan Dibben. Some of his more sinister behavior will be fully revealed in subsequent installments of this series, alongside some of the most bizarre real-life accounts of activity within the higher echelons of this specific black magic circle, an alleged satanic cult with some very powerful and wealthy members. Somehow, Esmeralda's Barn had quickly fallen into the hands of a group of very twisted characters, and only a year after the death of Esme Goulan, the hostess who had replaced the green-eyed Esmeralda, had gone missing. The Sunday Pictorial reporters took up the quest to find Patsy Morgan Dibben. They claimed to have called the Villa Greville in Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, which was owned at the time by the Honourable Richard Maynard Greville, who was the younger brother of the Earl of Warwick. The reporters claimed to have spoken to the Earl himself, and he gave this very detailed quote, with the 45-year-old stating, Patsy left here by air on Friday morning for Zurich, I think. Going on to talk about his younger brother, the Earl told reporters, I don't exactly know where Richard is, but I think he's touring Italy. I should think he's with Patsy. The Earl elaborated. There is no mystery about Patsy's stay here. She came several weeks ago and has been here before. She has been a guest of my brother and myself. Instead of saying his piece and moving on, the Earl of Warwick is quoted again. Whatever people might have said about this are baseless slanders. We have been friends for a long time, and this was a purely social occasion. I saw very little of her, as she spent much of the time with other guests. Whatever other men friends she may have are her business, and, so far as I'm concerned, hers alone. Patsy is quite capable of working out her own intimate problems in her own way. The Earl appeared keen to quash any potential rumours, whatever they may be, before they gained any traction at all. Patsy, when put into the position at Esmeralda's Barn, had started to be described as London's newest and youngest nightclub owner, and her disappearance from the popular club had obviously left many of the wealthy patrons with questions, particularly after the recent deaths of nightclub owners and hostesses such as Esmeralda Goulan and Barbara Knox-Marsh. There you can see from the related news hound, where we go through a clip there. The article, which goes on to make a brief mention of the club's previous owner, Esmeralda Noel Smith's tragic death, also makes a very interesting mention under the subtitle, brief note, saying, before leaving suddenly, she, Patsy Morgan Dibben, told the manager, Stephen Defay, former host of BBC Television's Café Continental, I can't tell you where I'm going, but something exciting is to happen. The article also notes that Patsy was known by her first name, not only to the club visitors like Billy Wallace, previously mentioned artists Pietro Annigoni and the Duke of Kent, but also by other stage and screen stars of the period. Patsy had reportedly left Horace Dibben a brief note before she disappeared. Patsy Morgan Dibben appeared in the newspapers on a few occasions from the time she took over Esmeralda's barn onwards. One extremely peculiar report from after she originally went missing was published in a weekly dispatch on the 28th of April 1957, entitled "Ex-Major and Girl Plan Shoot Drop Over Pole." And it started by saying, "A man who once kidnapped a German general and a beautiful woman who has never jumped from anything higher than a bar stool are planning to parachute down the frozen waste of the North Pole." The general, Mr. William Stanley Moss, who had been a wartime member of the British Special Operations Services, hopes that on Midsummer's Day he will be the first to parachute over the Arctic Circle. The article quotes Miss Morgan Dibben as saying, "I know people think I'm crazy to go. Perhaps I am, but it sounds fun anyway." You see that quote just at the end there of this article. By Sunday, the 28th of July, 1957, Patsy Morgan Dibben was featured again in the Sunday Mirror with the same reporter, Peter Hawkins, who wrote, "Patsy Morgan Dibben, the girl from the tenement who was taught the airs and graces of high society by a wealthy man, just like Eliza Doolittle in Shaw's Pygmalion, may now marry into society." The rumor on this occasion was that Patsy Morgan Dibben was due to marry into high society after agreeing to wed the nephew of Lord Honormore and Brown, one of the biggest landowners in Ireland. The man she was supposedly due to marry was Michael Mordaunt Smith, who was quoted as saying, "Patsy is the most wonderful girl in the world. We discussed marriage this week, as we have done many times before, but nothing definite has yet been arranged." From the time Patsy Morgan Dibben initially made front page news after reportedly going missing, throughout the following year or so, many reports, mostly exclusively from the Sunday Mirror publication, began to follow her bizarre and unverifiable adventures. Yet it would be Horace Dibben's own article written in the early 1960s that tells us some of what Patsy Morgan Dibben may have experienced. At that time, Horace Dibben claimed that Patsy had been taken by a dark stranger, a Hungarian-born lawyer, fine art dealer, diplomat, and inventor by the name of Andre Boszormenyi, who, Horace Dibben claimed, came to my house with a business proposition. The business deal he sought was reportedly the control of a nightclub in Knightsbridge, Esmeralda's barn. If Horace didn't agree to Boszormenyi's demand, then he was told he'd never see Patsy again. The devil himself, Andre Boszormenyi. A young Boszormenyi was pictured hanging out amongst the elites in the U.S. state of Florida in a picture published in Tatler on 17th of April 1935. The picture shows him alongside Miss Martha McGrane, an attractive American socialite who lived part of the year in London with her mother, who was described as a bystander in the Bystander publication in January 1936 as a dreamy poetess. The latter publication on the 22nd of May 1935 reported that Martha McGrane is over here for the summer with her mother, who has taken a house in Queen Anne's Mansions as a change to North Carolina. It also appears that Miss McGrane died the year after she was pictured alongside the intriguing Hungarian. During World War II, Boszormenyi was sent to a British internment camp under the guard of the Metropolitan Police Special Branch from the 9th of December 1941. He appealed the decision to detain him, with his appeal being refused on the 9th of March 1942. And there's Boszormenyi with his vampiric. He really does look like the devil himself. That's Martha Migraine, and another person in the back there from the Tatler in 1935. Andre Boszormenyi was not only employed as a practicing lawyer, rather he was the best known and most successful as an inventor and had various patents under his belt for pressure exchange devices in jet engines. By the 1950s, Boszormenyi was mainly working on new innovations in gas turbine technology for jet engines on behalf of Gendrasik Developments Limited, a Hungarian company which was led by Georgi Gendrasik until his death in 1954. Gendrasik had also been behind the innovation of various advances in gas turbines for aircraft. In June 1941, Germany and Hungary signed a mutual defense pact, and this saw Gendrasic's company at the time, the Invention, Development and Marketing Company Limited, arm Nazi fighters and bombers with turbine technology such as turboprop Gendrasic CS-1. It also led to Hungarian-born men such as Andre Boszormenyi being sent to internment camps. Jendrasic fled Hungary for the Nazi safe haven of Argentina after World War II, with a Hungarian government website stating that he had moved because distrust surrounded him. After his self-imposed exile to Argentina, Jendrasic moved to England, where he stayed until the end of his life. Boszormenyi worked alongside Klara, spelt Klara in Hungarian, Jendrasic, a close relative of Georgy Jendrasic, jointly registering their patents in US, Germany, Britain, and elsewhere. All of these patents had military applications. Boszormenyi's immigration papers to Brazil in 1950 also show that he was considered a British citizen by this time. His address was officially and curiously listed on those documents as being Leicester General Hospital, Gwendolyn Road, Leicester. Notably, the National Gallery in Britain also possesses correspondence between a man named César de Hawk and Andre Boszormenyi concerning the purchase of Cézanne's masterpiece, La Veille au Chapelet, formerly of the Jacques Doucet collection. De Hawk was a controversial figure who had been one of the art dealers reported by the OSS Art Loot and Investigations Unit in 1946, who were investigating missing artworks that had been looted by the Nazis. Even though he was obviously a suspect in the profiteering from Nazi looted artworks, De Hawk also became friends with the famous Monument Man officer Tom Howe, with their relationship continuing long after World War II. So the guy who is selling Nazi looted artworks, De Hawk, becomes friends with the Monument Man officer who were hunting down such people. You get a feeling there was a bit of collusion there. Boszormenyi was hanging around amongst the elites from very early on, and his association with powerful and wealthy continued, with the Tatler publishing a picture in 1955 of Boszormenyi with Madame Mendoza, the wife of then Cuban ambassador to Spain, at the Spanish embassy. In October 1956, a photo of Boszormenyi also appeared in the publication Sketch and shows him in conversation with the Spanish ambassador of the period, the Duke of Primo de Vera at Spanish embassy reception. At this event, the daughter of Winston Churchill was also in attendance. In 1950, the elusive Hungarian lawyer, inventor, art dealer, and diplomat had also been pictured alongside Don G. Nadal, the first secretary at the Spanish embassy. In fact, Boszormenyi was often noted as having attended various international embassies, including the Belgian embassy, where he enjoyed a meal alongside Lord and Lady Stragbolgi, Sir Louis and Lady Grieg, Sir Richard and Lady Ferry, as well as various other members of British aristocracy. By the 1950s, Boszormenyi was frequently traveling between London and New York, while also taking regular trips to Mexico and the Bahamas, with his name appearing on multiple passenger lists during this period. And there you go. That's an example. This is one of his visas here. And there's the older Boszormenyi looking. He looks like the devil on there for sure. And this is mother and father, Oscar e Helena Boszormenyi. Advogado is like advocate, I think, in Portuguese. Okay. That was his Brazilian visa for 1950. What exactly Andre Gabor Tihamer Boszormenyi was actually doing at all these different events is not completely clear, but according to Hod Dibben, he was a high-ranking Satanist doing the bidding of the devil himself, and he had taken Patsy Morgan Dibben from him. However, in the end, Horace Dibben did not need to hand over control of Esmeralda's barn to Boszormenyi, as had been demanded, after it was discovered that the unusual Hungarian had dropped dead due to a sudden heart attack at the age of 49 on the 6th of January 1957. What is also really notable concerning Andre Boszormenyi are the men who dealt with the probate for his last will and testament. One of them was Henry Davidor Goldsmith, ex-army man with a distinguished military career throughout World War II. More notable is the fact that Davidor Goldsmith was, soon after the death of Boszormenyi, to become the chairman of the Anglo-Israel Bank from 1961. He would also later become the chairman of Robert Maxwell's Pergamon Press from 1969 until 1971, during the period where Maxwell himself was briefly ousted from the company. The other man who acted as probate for the last will and testament of Andre Boszormenyi was Philip Beaumont Frere, who was married to Victoria Mary Enid Anne Frere, whose maiden name was Dugdale. Victoria Frere was a relative of the Earl of Warwick and Richard Maynard Greville, who, as mentioned earlier in the story, had given an alibi as to why Patsy Morgan Dibben had suddenly disappeared. Electoral records show that between 1947 and 1950, Philip Beaumont Frere and Andre Boszormenyi both lived in the affluent Lincoln's Inn Fields in London, and that Boszormenyi did eventually relocate to live at 23 Down Street, which was also the residence of the aforementioned younger brother of the Earl of Warwick, the Honourable Richard Maynard Greville. One abnormal and intriguing aspect of the last will and testament of Andre Boszormenyi Boszormenyi was that it was not actioned within the UK and was instead sent to the Bahamas to be dealt with. On Tuesday, the 5th of March 1957, the Evening Standard newspaper reported that Boszormenyi had left £31,969 after tax, and his last will and testament. But the article doesn't mention who received the inheritance. Only black sheep need apply. After narrowly avoiding giving up Esmeralda's barn to the devil himself, Horace Dibben went on to open another club in Piccadilly in an effort to court Britain's upper class. In the Daily Mirror article from 3rd of December 1959 entitled Only Black Sheep Need Apply, reporter John Rawls wrote, Antique dealer Hod Dibben is opening a smart, exclusive nightclub in Mayfair, especially for the titled and top people. It's called the Black Sheep, and it is in a narrow lane just off Piccadilly. Rawls continued, Hod tells me I don't want the whole social flock for my members. Just the black sheep. They are the rarest. There is Horace Dibben himself. He's a looker. It's from 1960. Some of the people who Dibben invited to have a free meal at the opening of his new venture were advertised as Viscount Euston, the Earl of Coventry, Prince Shiv of Palitana, and the Earl of Warwick, as well as other society regulars who frequented the elite drinking establishments of Mayfair, Knightsbridge, and Belgravia during this period. Dibben's business partner in the Black Sheep was Pat Steele. She was reported to have asked everybody to the party for the opening of the bar. Even Sir Winston and Lady Churchill, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Maria Callas, and Aristotle Onassis had been invited to the opening ceremony. However, the launch was reported as a flop, with the Evening Standard reporter who attended the event stating, I waited for the Black Sheep guests list to lengthen. It didn't. I left. Dibben was attempting to attract some of the most powerful people to Britain to his lair. And at first, there didn't seem to be much interest, but Horace's ventures eventually attracted more powerful elites. Like many of the other nightclub girls in the series, Patsy Morgan Dibben seems to have completely disappeared. More intricate stories about Patsy living on the European continent are passed around, but as of yet, there is no concrete first-hand evidence that she survived beyond her time at Esmeralda's barn. Horace Dibben didn't wait around for her return, as he was soon on the hunt for his next potential young female ward. In April 1958, playwright Henry Fielding reported for the Daily Herald, writing, 16-year-old Maureen Shelley told me last night she had received a marriage proposal from Mr. Horace Dibben, the antiques dealer who is 53, but she says she hasn't decided whether to accept. Dibben, you remember, was the guardian of the grocer's daughter, Patsy Morgan, whom he swept to fame as a society hostess. As Patsy Morgan Dibben, she ran the nightclub, which became the rage of the smart set, including the Duke of Kent. Horace Hod Dibben was again trying to find a girl he could mould, model, and use as he desired. The young girl in question on this occasion, described as a shapely redhead, told the reporter, Mr. Dibben has met my mummy, and we all had a talk. Mummy says it is up to me. I am thinking it over. The young Miss Shelley had known Hod Dibben for 2 months before he asked her hand in marriage. Even though she referred to Dibben as a wonderful man, the pair did not eventually wed. However, the girl who was once described in the newspaper as Pygmalion Patsy was soon to be replaced by another, even more fascinating young lady. Dibben's next partner and future wife was a young temptress who he'd hired to work at his Black Sheep nightclub and who was to stay by his side over a decade before she, like many other nightclub girls of the period, died of a reported overdose. Hod Dibben's newest Pygmalion nightclub girl, however, would eventually end up in the bedroom of other men, far beyond Britain, allegedly including then President-elect John F. Kennedy. That's not allegedly, that's a fact. And she doesn't necessarily die of an overdose. She dies of an overdose, but she doesn't, it's not the overdose that kills her. She drowns in jelly. That's the official story. She drowns in jelly. Did too many pills and then her found face down dead in a bowl of jelly. So you can explore the source material with me on Newshound, and you can go through a special adventure through space and time with me. In the episode below, we examine the source material behind Black Hand Free after the tragic death of Esmeralda Galan. Horace Dibben has taken over Esmeralda's barn and put his ward Patsy Morgan Dibben in charge as a new hostess with the mostess. But soon Patsy goes missing, rumored to have been taken by the devil himself, Andre Boszormenyi. And there you go. And you see, you can just click on any of these below and you can get involved. And that is the Black Hand series number 3, Hod Dibben. As you see, there's lots of different clips that you can watch that are within the article. Like I say, I do like to do very interactive articles, and at the end I go through for 2.5 hours through all of the source material. All of these lines here are the different source material that I use to make up the article. Of course, quotes like this from the Shepton Mallet Journal are all linked in, so you can go and have a look at them yourselves. You may need a newspaper subscription to be able to do that in some cases. And each of these stories about the satanic adventures of Hod Dibben have each been given links to. And you can go and read the original articles or listen to the read-throughs that are available in the actual article. And there he is, Horace Ronald Dibben. And the next in this series is very interesting. It's Mariella Novotny. So it's his next Pygmalion girl, and she's a corker. And this starts the whole man in a mask sex parties, all the satanic sex parties, all of the spy games, everything that leads up to downfall of the British government, to Mariella Novotny being smuggled out of JFK's bedchamber by the FBI and CIA together. in what looks like a sex compromise operation against JFK to try and get him to do whatever the establishment wants. In between the time he's been elected president in December and he's or in November he's become president. During that time when he's president elect is when they chose to run this scam, and it's very important. It's all part, of course, the Black Hand series, which you can find on Newspaste. And as we see here, let me roll it up. Newspaste has had a bit of a redesign recently. It's very colorful, very pink, neon pink, neon pink Newspaste. You've got all of the articles that you can read about that I've written all at the top here. Buy me a coffee, Patreon, Ko-Fi. Please support the work. I need your help. There's extra links there if you want to go and scoot about the place. Find me on the different video platforms, podcasts, etc. And you know, this is my most recent article, The Third Way, which came out a couple of days ago. Is a very interesting article. You got Newspace podcast, of course. You can listen to them all here. You can watch last week's underneath. You've got Newshound, that one's for the Pottinger ultimatum. You've got lots of different articles here that you can click on and read. All of them have a little bit of interest about them. And it's become very colourful as newspace.com, and you can you could go on searching for Stanley, watch all the things about the road that leads us to the takedown of Jeffrey Epstein. There's also News Theory, which I've only made a couple of news theories, but they're very good. I've enjoyed them very much. I want to do more. The Schwab articles, of course, are down there. Bursting the Davos bubbles there. Who do they think they are? Black Hand, of course. And there's our list of characters there, and there's a bit about the Pablo Miller case at the bottom. Like I say, you support me. If there's a way you can support me, support me. I need your help. I can only do this with your help, and I will eventually, if I can't get enough support, I will eventually have to get some form of normie job, where I don't get as much time to write these in-depth articles, and I want the time to write these in-depth articles. This is what I love to do. This is my passion in life. This is what I enjoy. I do this not not only for myself, not only for you. I do it for the record, because there's a lot of information, and this in the Black Hand series very much so. It was a lot of information in the Black Hand series that would be lost to time. If I didn't note down a lot of this, people would have a different idea about who Esmeralda Gulen was. If it was up to Lillian Pizzacchini, who wrote a book about this era, or Thompson, who we talked about in the Hod Dibben article there, if it was up to them, they would have rewritten the history of Esmeralda Gulen. No one would have known about her properly. And these sort of stories give us an idea of how the situation happened and how it got to the way it did. And I really want to get the opportunity to make sure I save the history as it's being deleted, censored, changed, altered by the mainstream writers out there. Not just the journalists of the time, but the mainstream writers too, the people who write the books, who write the novels, the authors. They're changing it too. They're changing history. I mean, Lillian Pizzacchini, she makes so many different mistakes. She claims that Esmeralda Gulen died in a house in Baker Street, which is how Barbara Knox Marsh died. They don't tell you the truth. And if you examine the evidence, you discover there's an entirely different story behind the scenes. And it's very suspicious. And Horace Dibben, you know, he might just disappear into nothingness. You won't hear about him again unless someone like me comes along and writes the articles. So while there are a lot more important, pertinent, prescient articles that could be written right now, these are really important ones too and need to be treated as such. So support my work if you can. I love doing this, and I do this not only for myself, I do this for you, but I do this for keeping history, keeping keeping the history there, keeping knowledge, facts, getting them before they can be deleted, before newspaper archives are filled up, before all of this happens. So I need your help. To do that, you can support me via all of those platforms, newspace.com, of course. And that was another Johnny Vedmore read through about one of my favorite articles um, in the Black Hand series, The Devil Himself, about Horace Dibben. And he is an incredible guy, incredibly interesting guy. Have fun listening to the read throughs of the articles I do of him. I had fun. I laugh a lot through them because of course, it was my start of doing my Hod Dibben impression. I'm getting better at doing Hod Dibben, and it may actually go somewhere at some point. I do want to do more Hod Dibben. But the next article in this series to read through will be, of course, about Mariellen Novotny, his next Pygmalion girl, and it's well worth the wait. So thank you for joining me on another Johnny Vedmore read through. Bye.
What we know is that we will end up with many more unemployed